Hello, this is going to be the coaching video for those that will be leading, teaching, facilitating an on-campus small group that's going to meet on Sunday, May the 3rd. And we are in this series that we're calling Aliens Among Us. And basically what we're doing is we're working our way through the book of First Peter and seeing how Peter points out the fact that in the sense of aliens, that we are strangers, we're pilgrims here on this earth. This is not our home, and how that relates to us as living out life that God has for us today. And what we're going to be doing this Sunday on May the 3rd, we're going to be looking at a passage out of First Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 12, and be our focus there in that passage. We're going to continue to talk about this subject, this topic of holiness, and how does that get worked out in our lives, in the sense of what does that look like. And this lesson that you'll be doing today is going to complement that message that we'll be sharing with you on Sunday May the 3rd there, Sunday morning, in this as we continue to talk about that and talk about in the sense of how our lives are different in living our lives different, and then how that impacts, how that influences the people around us there. And kind of a little bit of that, and you'll see how that fits together with the lesson we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes. Now, in this series, holiness, the last couple of this message and the previous one have been focusing on this subject or topic of holiness. And I hope you're picking up the aspect that holiness is seen not so much as a noun, but maybe as a verb. And holiness it has to do with taking the truths and the new life that God is giving us, and that being lived out of our lives. And that's going to be more seen in this passage we're going to be studying here in your small group on Sunday morning, May the 3rd. So let's go ahead and get that transcript that you hopefully received with the link for this video. Go ahead and get that printed out if you haven't done also already. And what I would encourage you to do, if you have not read through the lesson at all, put the video on pause right now. Read through that lesson, maybe read through it a couple of times, then come back, and then we'll pick up here and talking through some things that will hopefully be of some help to you as you prepare to lead, teach, facilitate your group there on Sunday morning. Well, all right, let's dive into this, and here's really what I'm going to do is I just want to give you kind of a little bit quick overview of the lesson, and then I'm going to point out a few things from the text, and then a little wrap-up segment. And here's because in this particular lesson, I think you're going to they all do a really good job, but the manuscript, the teaching, the text part of this lesson is done very well. And so I just want to encourage you to spend a lot of personal time in that. I'm not going to try to add a whole lot to that, but I do want to encourage you to spend some time in it. And as we point out a few things from that, I think that'll be helpful for you and kind of some things that help you do that. Okay, let me just give you kind of a quick overview of this lesson. And the overview is basically talking about the concept of faith and works. And oftentimes that becomes a little bit of tension in our lives, a bit of conflict in our lives. And just let me throw this out at the very beginning and make sure we're all very clear about this. The Bible tells us that we are saved by faith through grace, not on the basis of anything that we do. It is all by putting our faith, our trust in Jesus and what he has done for us on the cross through his death, burial, and resurrection. And so let's just get that out of the way real quick. As you go through this, there's going to be maybe a tension that develops. You're going to, oftentimes in this particular passage we're going to be looking at, there is a thought that there's a tension that develops between what one writer is saying and what another writer is saying. That's not true. Obviously, the Bible is a unit, and there's no contradictions per se in the Bible, but instead there's complementary aspects of the teachings in the Bible. And so that's what we're going to hopefully see today. Now, let me just tell you the passage we're going to be looking at is found in James chapter 2, and we are going to be focusing there on the verses, James chapter 2. We're going to be focusing on the verses, I've gone blank on that. Let me grab it real quick. James 2, 14 through 26. Yeah, I didn't want to give you the wrong reference. And in this section, there is this aspect of that I just mentioned that comes up where there seems to be a sense of tension between faith and works. But realize that tension is not tension that the writer of the book of James, obviously James, that he sensed, because he was one who, just like me and you, would believe that we're saved by grace through faith. And he would be one that would not see a contradiction between faith and works, but instead a complementing of faith and works. And so keep that in mind as you work your way through the text there. Now, as I said, there's some that see a conflict between the writings of Paul versus the writing of James. But I'm going to give you some cross-reference verses I think that will help you see there's not a conflict. Instead, as I already said, there's a complementing of one another in this. And they both held the same theological view, perspective, and each one of them was emphasizing maybe a certain aspect of that. All right, so here to kind of get you going. Be sure and spend some time looking at the introduction. The introduction has some very good material in there to help you not only orient your group, but orient yourself to the text and to prepare for what you're going to be diving into. So spend some time looking into that. That reference in Ephesians 2, 8 through 10, obviously was written by the Apostle Paul. And I think you can see that what Paul says in Ephesians 2, 8 through 10 is very much in line with what James is teaching in James 2, 14 through 26. So be sure that you look at that, think that through, look up those verses, read through those verses, think on them a few minutes. Now, let me throw out another passage from the writings of Paul that I think is very helpful as a cross-reference in thinking through what's being taught in James chapter 2. In Titus chapter 3, verses 4 through 8, read those verses, think on those verses as well. Even as you're getting ready to dive into the text of James chapter 2. And it would be that I think would be helpful for you and your leading teaching to bring that out to your group on Sunday morning. But see that Paul and James are not in conflict at all. Okay? Now, in the text, as you get ready to teach that text, first of all, as always, I encourage you to sit down and read through James chapter 2 in its entirety. And then read through those focus verses, 14 through 26, several times, just to get real familiar with it and familiar with what's taking place there. And then begin to look at the commentary manuscript that's there through teaching the text that can help you give you some additional insights, and then also some ways to communicate, to teach this to your group. Let me call attention to on page 4. There's a teaching gray shaded area on the right side, makes reference to a theological tightrope. Be sure and read through that. Look at that, because it points out that how easy it is for us that we fall to one extreme or the other. And so just read through that and make sure you pay special attention to that. I think it'll give you help not only for yourself, but as you work your way through the text with your group. The big idea that we're presenting here in this passage is simply this. And remember, it's in complementing the message that's being shared Sunday morning. So if you follow it, you've got something to pull from in that. If you're preceding the message, then you can lead into that as well. And in fact, one of the things you could do with your on-campus small group is say, look, in just a minute, we're going to move into the main room, and then we're going to hear a message from Brett. From 1 Peter 2 that's going to help us put all of this together. Okay? So there's some things there to keep in mind. Here's the big idea. The big idea is simply this. A workless faith is a worthless faith. In other words, what the big idea that James presents is this. If your faith is not producing some type of expression in your life, then you need to consider whether it is truly a faith that has value, a faith that has worth, a faith that is authentic or genuine. He also is making this statement. If your faith is not producing some expression in a way that others can see that, can recognize that, then it is not making a difference, and it is not a faith that is relating to holiness that God has called us to. Okay? So keep that in mind. That's kind of your big idea there. Now, he gives us, as we go through the passage, you'll see there are two statements that are made that a worthless faith, first of all, is characterized by a fake compassion. In other words, there's not a genuine expression in relating to and ministering to others. He also makes a statement that a worthless faith is characterized by empty belief. In other words, worthless faith, if it's just acknowledging the facts, the biblical facts, acknowledging the things that we would say are true about God, but where those things are not being held on to, they're not being embraced, they're not being trusted in, then that really is a empty belief. And he makes a very strong correlation there to drive that point home, because he talks about that even the demons acknowledge some things about God, but they don't have faith. And so that's really that's about as strong as you can get in making that comparison there. Here's a couple of verses, rough references for you to take in consideration in these 2 points. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Look at that verse in regards to what we're talking about here with fake compassion, empty belief. Therefore, if any man is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away, behold, new things have come. Think through the implication of what Paul is saying there in these two statements that James is making here. Also, Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 through 23. There Paul speaks about the fruit of the Spirit, singular fruit that gets expressed in these 9 different aspects. And relate that to what you're looking at here in this passage, and seeing that both Paul and James are basically saying the same thing. If your faith will have or should have some type of expression to it. Okay? Then at the end of your teaching the text time, there at the end of this passage rather, there are 2 examples of faith that are pointed out, of a faith that is a working faith that is expressed. He uses 2 people to point that out from the Old Testament, 2 Old Testament figures. One is Abraham, and the other is Rahab. Probably two that we would not put together in a normal thought pattern. But he uses Abraham, the father of the nation of Israel. And he points out there that incident from Abraham's life where his faith was expressed in a very dramatic way. Here's what I'd encourage you to do. Go back and look at Romans chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. See what Paul says there about Abraham, about his faith, about how he was justified, how he was made right with God, how his faith made him right with God. Then realize that later, after that his faith had been, he had exercised faith in God. Then later on in his life is when this expression of faith shows up. Think those things through. Then for Rahab, go back and get the background to her. Joshua chapter 2 kind of gives you that. And then in verses 8 through 12, in Joshua chapter 2, pay special attention to verses 8 through 12, because there in her interaction with the 2 spies, you see an expression of faith on her part. And then later on in the story, you see her faith, as she talks about her faith, talks about God and the things she's come to embrace about him, the God of Israel. Then how that gets expressed later on. So look at those 2, and I think those can kind of come up to at the very end of your or towards the end of your passage. Those 2 examples are great examples to use in regards to the teaching that's taking place. Obviously, James does that under the inspiration of the Spirit. So you don't pass it by either. Okay. Use that and use it in the way that James does, is to illustrate exactly the truths that he was teaching in the previous verses there. And then on page 8, don't miss the counterfeit money illustration. I think it's a great way to help tie some of this stuff together that you've been teaching your small group about. Hey, don't forget the application moment. There is listed for you on page 10. You've got your the little handout for your group there. I think that's on page 12. Yep, that's right, your small group handout. Don't pass that by. Again, however you choose to use that, we'll leave that up to you. But I encourage you, use it. Either in the way that it's expressed there, or if you do it as a group as a whole. But don't let that slip by, because that's what really moves us in to having a faith that is expressed and seeing holiness being worked out in our lives. Okay? Have a great time together as you always do. Thanks for what you do, and we look forward to hearing how God's going to use that in your life and the life of your group this Sunday. God bless.
Well, what I'm ashamed of tries to hide and tell me that things are fine just the way they are. I'm so afraid.